as I'm sure anybody involved with Robert Monroe's work will know, that there's so many of these things. There's a vast catalogue of personal stories, really, that, again, you could just spend hours reciting, and some of the most phenomenal, mind-bending things you could possibly imagine. Um, the point of it, though, is not the thing itself, it's what it tells you about what's going on. So for me at that time, it affected a life trajectory where certain things that I was going to do, I probably didn't do because of that event, on reflection in retrospect. So having had my worldview upgraded by that, I would say, rather than shaken, which is an attitude. That's all it is. I thought, wow, that is fascinating. I must therefore build into my life a certain amount of energy exchange, a certain amount of flexibility where I can give time and effort into those areas of study and those areas of more than anything practice. So for me, it's all very well having abstract thoughts about things, but you have to put it into your felt experience, into your own life. Um, so I think when you have these experiences and you embrace them as something to be treated as a sort of launch pad, you can then understand their role in your life. If you zoom out from your own route map for a minute and just look out and say, "Oh right, I get it." So that inspirational event as a teenager essentially made sure that a certain parameters in life were taken forward. So I didn't end up necessarily, with a large family and lots of responsibilities and a very heavy workload, which would have been fine. And if somebody's in that position, fine, that's necessary and appropriate, no doubt. But for me, having flexibility and fluidity has always been really important in my life. And as I've met other teachers, certainly, people much more senior and mature and experienced than myself, um, I've always noted how they too have that in their life, and it seems to be very helpful to put it conservatively. It seems to be very helpful to have that. Um, and some people are fiercely protective of that to, very strange levels, which we won't go into right now. But I think that those kind of events, um, the purpose of them is to show you a life trajectory that is one of growth and one of empowerment. And that's why the Buddhists warn against these kind of telepathic and telekinetic abilities as something to get excited about and say, "Oh, great, I can do it now. I've finished." They're really, really just the very, very tip of the iceberg. And to some extent, once you start to be able to do this stuff, um, as I said earlier, it brings a certain amount of responsibility with that. So to go around flaunting it inappropriately to an unknown audience is probably not a good idea. Um, so I've always felt that the people who are kind of hovering 10 feet above the ground and walking through concrete walls and stuff, which exists and which I have personal experience of those things, they're not going to be putting YouTube videos out about that. You're not going to see them on the History Channel on a special program after the Bigfoot program. You're not going to see that because it's not appropriate. In fact, it's highly inappropriate. So as your consciousness deepens and refines itself, you start to be obliged in some ways to have a more universal aspect to your consciousness to say, well, this isn't just about me. This is about everybody I touch, and this is about all the other aspects of consciousness that's connected to me. And so you start to behave with this kind of uh, universal responsibility, which is automatic. It's not about morals or ethics. That's nothing to do with it. It's just as you pan out, as you zoom out from that whole system, your truth has to encompass more and more truth. And when it does, it becomes more and more universal. So that means that you begin to respect other people's free will and other people's position on their growth, on their journey more and more naturally without even thinking about it. Um, and that means, again, that those phenomena necessarily restrict themselves to the people who are naturally attracted to that. So if I give a workshop, people are going to be interested in discussing that, what it means and what it's about and how those things are achieved. But if I did a very mainstream interview on, uh, television or something about, my book, and I wouldn't bring that up because it's not appropriate and it's not really going to achieve anything. I'd be more interested in talking about the psychological and philosophical aspects of the work because that's more respectful, frankly. It's more respectful to what's actually happening here with the energy exchange between you and a wider audience. If I just wanted to scintillate people and sensationalize things all the time, I could easily do that and just concentrate on the sexy, dark, mysterious bits of my work. I could do that, but it would be very short sighted of me and it would ultimately restrict my own growth. So I'm just not going to do that. It's of no interest to me. And you can spot other people when they do that. We don't need to name any names, but you can spot people who are wrapped up in ego in the work, which is always especially amusing in this realm because, of course, you don't. It doesn't take long when you delve into uh, the fundamentals of how this place fits together before you approach spirituality and approach divinity, in my view. And to run around with an ego in that realm is rather amusing. So yeah.
Okay, Tom, any additions to what Neil just said?
Well, sure. I can actually take what's just been said and integrate that with what we said on the last question, to see how all this kind of fits together. Um, Neil was talking about how how these things are kind of, uh, shall we say, self-policing, in the sense that
Yeah.
as you gain more and more ability to modify things, you less and less are interested in using that ability. These go together, but it's not just the individuals. It's all wrapped up together in one package. The larger consciousness system likes these demonstrations at certain times and places because of the people who happen to be there can benefit from it, as Neil benefited from this conjuring of the flies. But had this conjure of the flies had all of the major networks in the US and Britain there with their cameras running, guess what? Wouldn't have happened. Why wouldn't have happened? Because several reasons. We can look at it from his viewpoint. He would have been uh, demonstrating ego about, look what I can do. Look at this amazing thing that I can do, and how the amazing person I am. That would have been counterproductive to his growth and his ability. And then we look at it from the other point. I take all this and formalize it into a term called the psi uncertainty principle. And the psi uncertainty principle is there for a reason. It basically says that people are not ready for this. And as Neil said, they don't know how to process it. They don't know what to do with it. It frightens them. It's changed. It's places they don't want to go. They're comfortable where they are, and this would force them into a place that would be uncomfortable. Well, the larger consciousness system knows that if you force people to go where they are not ready to go, you don't end up with a solution. You end up with a bigger problem. So that doesn't happen. That's what the psi uncertainty principle is all about. The psi events can happen, and you think that, okay, they break the rules, and we have this rule set, and we're going to break the rules here, but they only happen in as much as they are productive and that they're helpful. Somebody gets a wake-up call. Somebody gets their eyes opened. Somebody is working on their skills or their ability to control their consciousness, this sort of thing. They don't happen as a in-your-face, look at this, to people who aren't ready. So we have this guy who runs swords to himself, and eventually, after 500 demonstrations, he swallows something pointy and it kills him. Why is that? Well, we see the same sort of thing going on lots of places. If you've seen the videos on YouTube of SRI, Put Off and Targ, when they did work with Uri Geller, and very very tight protocols, where everything was doubled and triple blind and so on. And Urey came in and did things that had a probability that he could have done them just by accident of like 1 in a couple of million. But then we find later that Uri Geller, makes a fool of himself doing doing some things and discredits himself. Well, of course, that then pours discredit on all of the things that, he's ever said or done. We find that, some of the early and very accurate remote viewers, eventually they started remote viewing, alien installations on the moon and other things, which discredited them in the public's mind. So on. These things happen, and they happen for a reason. You can have a demonstration of psi in a sense that it helps wake people up. But when it starts to rubbing other people's nose in it who aren't ready for it, who aren't ready to be woken up, that needs to be avoided. You end up with a bigger problem. You don't want all these people who turn their head away from these things to suddenly be forced to realize that this is the way it works. You won't want them all out there trying to figure out how they can learn to make their boss give them a raise by focusing their intent, and how to make their mother-in-law go away, or how to hurt people and give them headaches and make them ill because you want to get rid of them. You don't want that kind of thing going on. These people are not ready to assume that kind of responsibility and that kind of growth. So the system will use these things as wake-up calls, but it also makes sure that it doesn't get out of hand to the point that it's credible in the larger society. So the fact that the newspapers and so on don't take crop circles seriously, or nobody really takes this guy who ran himself through with swords very seriously anymore, part of that is part of the plan. They don't, because they have a kind of an inclination, if you will, in their own consciousness. It's like, leave that alone. Don't go there.
And isn't it interesting?
They get that message because it wouldn't be profitable for them to go there and grab hold of that. They're not ready to deal with it. It would create a bigger problem than it would create a solution. We think sometimes that, gee, if everybody would just wake up and everybody would just come and see this evidence and understand that this is real and it means that there's something greater than us around here, well, that wouldn't necessarily be a great thing. That would be pushing the cart out in front of the horse, and they're not ready. If you push somebody who's not ready for some information into that information, ready or not, you get problems. So the system protects itself and protects all of us alike as it creates these demonstrations, and it creates a situation in which these demonstrations only stay local and only stay, in the margins, so that the people who can get something out of them will get something out of them, and the people who would do a disservice to push that in their face never have to face it. So it's kind of just the way it is, and I agree very much with what Neil was saying. You have these demonstrations, and again, if you think of it as consciousness and our reality is virtual, and you say, well, how could somebody do that? I just don't believe that somebody could make a bunch of flies. That's a living thing with very complex organs. How can you make a bunch of flies fly around? That's a bunch of nonsense. That's because you believe that you live in a physical reality that is fundamental. There is no physical reality. There are no flies. It's just data. There are no bodies. There are no brains. There are no houses. There are none of this stuff. It's all just data. It's information, and it doesn't really exist. We just interpret it as existing. So if somebody feeds you information, if in your data stream you get the information, the smell, the sight, and the sound of thousands of flies flying around, well, that's just information. That's not so hard to achieve. Nobody had to assemble biological systems. All they had to do was assemble the data that described what happened. You see, it's not you don't have to see it as that difficult a thing. It's just information.